Hello viewers, this is Charles and this is the next in my series Learn Programming and Game Development with Lua. In this tutorial I'm going to talk about comments, types, variables and scope. So let's get started. I've opened ZeroBrain Studio and I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to save it as variables. The first thing I'm going to talk about is comments because I'm going to use them in this file and you'll be able to download this file from GitHub. I'll put a link in the description below. Single line comments in Lua start with double dash. When you type double dash, anything on the line that comes after it is ignored by the Lua interpreter. You can also have multiple line comments which allow you to type in a block of code, such as some notes. In Lua, multi-line comments start with double dash and then double opening square brackets, and they're closed with double closing square brackets and double dash. So they look like this. Now let's write the Hello World program that I introduced in the previous tutorial, but this time using variables. A variable in any computer language is kind of a container into which you can place some sort of value. So you can think of a variable in Lua as a container in which you could place a string, a number, or a complex compound piece of data without needing to worry about the type. More technically, a variable name is a symbolic name, a character string which is attached to an abstract storage location. So now let's write the Hello World program, but this time using variables. And at this point, I think I should point out that really to learn how to code, to learn how to program a computer language, the most useful thing you can do at this point is to just type in the examples either while watching the video or, even better, from memory after watching the video. This is by far the quickest way to learn. So here I've defined two variables. The first one is the greeting, which is going to be hello, with a space, so we don't need to worry about the space ahead of name. And the second one is the name, which is going to be world. Now, if I simply type print, then greeting, then the concatenation operator to put the two strings together, and then name, and then close the brackets, and then run the program, we should get the hello world in the output. And you can see that's precisely what happens. Now, it's good practice in Lua to prefix your variable names with local. That limits them to the block of code that they're declared in, or if they're not declared in a block of code, the file they're declared in. If you don't put local, they're declared global automatically. Global variables are less performant, so it's better to use local ones where you can. And in fact, I would go as far as to say, unless you need a global variable, you should be using a local one. I'm going to come back to the concept of scope later in this tutorial. I'm now going to talk about types. In the statically typed language, the types of values and variables are declared at compile time. They cannot be changed at runtime. Statically typed languages include C, C++, Java, and Rust. In a dynamically typed language, values have types and variables do not. Dynamically typed languages include Python and Lua. Now I think we need to talk a little about data types in Lua. Lua has 8 data types. These are nil, Boolean, integer, string, function, user data, thread, and table. But in this tutorial, to keep things manageable, we're simply going to look at two data types. We're going to look at numbers and we're going to look at strings, and we'll introduce the other data types gradually as we work through the tutorials. In the preceding example, both hello and world are strings. Strings are immutable sequences of characters. That means you can't change them. If you type in name equals Mars, what Lua actually does is to create a new variable, replacing name with a new variable called name, but this time with the value Mars. Now in terms of numbers, Lua simply has one data type, number, for all numbers. Other languages such as C, C++ and Java make a distinction between different types of integers depending on their length and floating point numbers. But we don't need to worry about that here because Lua just has number, so that makes things nice and simple for scripting. Now at this point I'm going to introduce the type function because it's particularly useful here. I haven't introduced functions yet, that's a topic for another video, but we have been using them because we've been using print, and now we're going to use a new one called type. And what type does is it tells you the type of the value that the variable refers to. So I think this is best done by demonstration, so I'm going to write some more code to demonstrate it. So what this line of code does is we create a new variable, greeting type, which will contain the type of greeting, and then we're going to print it out. And we expect the result to be string, so let's run it and check. And you can see the result is string. Now I'm going to create a number. I'm going to call it first number, and I'm going to set it to 12. Then I'm going to make another variable, first number type, and I'm going to set that to the type of first number. Strictly speaking, the type of the value of the variable first number, and then I'm going to print it. And you can see the autocomplete's quite helpful. And then if we type, or rather if we don't type erroneous brackets, then we can run this and you'll see that it's a number, which is what we expect. Let's try that with Boolean. Booleans are very simple. They're either true or false. So let's define one. So let's define a Boolean. Then let's print it. And then let's find its type. So I'm going to use the same naming convention. And we'll print that as well. And let's run it. So what we're expecting is to see true and then Boolean after number. So let's try it. And there we are. So that's done what we expected. So we've now actually covered 3 out of the 8 data types. So that's a good start. Now I want to talk about scope. The scope of a variable defines where that variable may be used. And so far we've been using local variables. These variables are local to this file. Now in Lua there are 3 possible scopes. Variables can be global, so they can be used everywhere. They can be local, as we've seen here, local to a file or code block, or they can be table values. For now we're just going to talk about global and local because tables in Lua are a whole topic in their own right and deserve their own tutorial. So to demonstrate how local variables actually work, I'm going to introduce the concept of the code block. We can explicitly declare a code block simply using the keywords do and end like this. So I've typed in do and then return, and then Zero Brain Studio does the indentation for me. I'm now going to create a local variable here called greeting, and that will shadow the variable we created earlier. So local greeting, and I'm going to set it to the German greeting, Guten Tag. Then I'm going to do the print like we did before. Concatenation operator again, and then name and close bracket. I think it would be useful to have the space after Guten Tag, so I'm going to add that in. And to end the block, I'm going to type end, and then I'm going to repeat the same line of code just to show you what happens when this local variable, which is shadowing greeting that we defined here, goes out of scope. So we're just going to go print greeting name. Let's run it and see what happens. We get an error because I haven't put in the equal sign. So now if you look at the last two lines of the output, the first one is Guten Tag world, which is what we expected. But look what happens when this goes out of scope. We revert to the variable that was shadowed, and then we get hello world again. So the key point here is this local variable greeting only exists inside this code block. Because it has the same name as this local variable, it simply shadows it. Let's create a second local variable here, and we're going to call this local second number. So this is different to the first number, which was 12, and we're going to call this 14. And then we're going to print it. And then we're going to run it. So we get 14. So what happens if we try to print it here? Remember, it's now out of scope. That means it actually doesn't exist. So you can see the autocomplete is not helping. But what do you think will happen now? Well, what happens now is nil. And what that means is second number doesn't exist. That's actually quite a useful thing to be able to test, but we'll see that in future tutorials. Just to show you how easy it is to end up with unexpected behavior, what happens if we get rid of local here? Well, you can see that now greeting is still producing Guten Tag, so this shows you the importance of being quite careful about the use of this local keyword. Let's put it back as it was and run it again, and you can see we go back to the shadowing behavior. So the question now is why, when we remove local, does it do this? If you think about it, all you're doing now is you're redeclaring, you're redefining what greeting means. So now greeting means Guten Tag, and that just carries forward. You haven't declared a new variable here at all. You've just redefined the existing one. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please consider clicking the like and subscribe buttons. That helps support me creating new content. In upcoming tutorials, we're going to introduce a few more concepts that we need before we can start looking at the Love2D game framework. Thank you again for watching. Have a great day.